let's hear a second panel for the day. Please welcome Antoine Petit and Sam Altman. Antoine, Sam, could you please join me on stage?
Okay, come. Nous allons parler de la compétition.
So, we're going to talk about world competition in AI.
For discussion, I think I will switch to English if it works for you guys. Sam, Antoine, welcome.
Thank you.
And Antoine, you are the president of the CNRS and a researcher. CNRS, Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, and you're also a professor of computer science, if I'm not mistaken. Sam, you are an American entrepreneur, an investor, a programmer, a blogger, and you are the president of Y Combinator and the co-chairman of OpenAI. So first question is for you, Sam. You are the chairman of OpenAI. This is a non-profit research company that aims to promote and develop friendly AI. And so do you have any comment or reaction on the first panel discussion at large? Actually, I would like also to hear you on research and openness of the research beyond what they've said in the panel, if you bear me.
Yeah, I really resonate with what they were saying. I think if we are successful, if the entire field is successful, this will be one of the most transformative moment in human history. And so the stakes are high to get it right. And the stakes are also high to make sure that it benefits humanity as a whole, that it's not built by a small group of people, representative of a small group of people, and deployed for the benefit of a small group of people. But the thing that we think is really important is that we are able to do this on behalf of everyone, with everyone's input and for the benefit of everyone. I think if we aren't able to do that, if we don't figure out very new ways to think about governance structures and how we deploy technology for the world, then we will have a future that is representative of a very small number of people, and we'll have inequality on a scale we've never seen before.
Avoiding the divide, that's what you mean?
Yes.
Avoiding the divide, yeah. Very interesting, thank you. Antoine, you're the president of the CNRS and you are a trusted observer of the competition between countries in terms of research and AI. In your view, who do you think is leading the competition in AI? Is it America, is it China, is it Europe, startup, tech giants, traditional industry?
Bon, d'abord, soyons honnêtes.
Well, let's be honest. It's not us, at least for the time being. It's not us. Otherwise, we wouldn't have organized this whole day. In countries such as China and the US, who are well ahead of us, and smaller countries too, Israel, South Korea, Singapore, probably, which are also ahead of us. But I actually think that thanks to today's meeting, the situation can change. And what is important today is, first of all, of course, the level of quality of the debates and the fact that we have a report. The report in itself is not that important because in France we're really good at preparing reports with no follow-up. A year ago, we already had a report. But this time we had a report, but we have ministers here and the President of the Republic will join us this afternoon, which really illustrates the fact that there has been, we're more aware. And I think that it's a good idea to really take advantage of all that already exists in France. We have talented people, French talented people in computer sciences, as well as in the social and human sciences. Because when we talk about artificial intelligence, there is a need for cooperation between hard science specialists and human sciences in research, in academic research and in private sector research. I think that is one of the most, the first challenge. We need more French companies investing in research. We talked about Samsung, Google, Facebook. Google set up a lab in France, which is a chance. But I think that French companies also have to become aware of the challenges.
Sorry?
I was listening to the end of his remarks.
Yeah. No, do you want to add something about exactly this, the competition between countries and where different countries are, the balance of power in terms of AI research, and yeah, what needs to be done.
I think the framework
and France, if you can.
Competition between countries is dangerous. I think that this is, I think a scenario that we need to avoid at all costs is an international arms race. I think if there were ever a time for international cooperation, this was it. This is it. I think the way we get, the way we maximize probability of safe development and deployment of AI is not a race, because in a race, you put aside safety. You just try to get to the finish line first. And so I think I am happy to hear about more countries getting excited about this. I think it's very important. France in particular has unbelievable AI talent. We talk about that. We're not sure why so many of the great AI researchers are French, but that's awesome. But I think it really is critically important that the international community come together and not treat this as a competition or a race.
Thank you. For both of you, what do you think will be the future challenges of AI? Maybe Antoine, you want to begin with that.
Alors, déjà, il y en a plein. Il y a des challenges techniques.
Well, there are many challenges, technical challenges, such as those mentioned this morning. And I think that one of the main challenges is the one that I talked about briefly just a few minutes ago. It's the issue of interaction between hard sciences and soft sciences, and ethical challenges too. Now, I'd like to make one observation. We have to be careful. France and Europe should not specialize in ethical questions, while at the same time, US and China do business and create jobs. So we really have to be careful, because it could happen. So we have to do business in an ethical way. Now, concerning the discussions we've heard this morning, I was surprised, because I don't think that ethics is a universal concept. AI for ethics, that's very good from a marketing standpoint. But are we talking here about a humanity with the same ethical values everywhere? Maybe it will be the case one day, but it's not the case today. So I think it's important that today in France and maybe in Europe, we work on ethical issues. What is the ethics we want? I think that the concept in China is completely different than the concept in France. And in a web chat in China, you use your identification document. In China, people really appreciate being welcomed in a shop, and if you have the shop assistant calling you by your surname. In France, if it happens, you would be really scared and you would run away. So ethical issues are important, but we have to be very careful, and we have to make sure that ethical issues are respected everywhere. We're not saying here that our rules are better than others, but let's not assume that there is some kind of universal ethical rules, because if it was the case, there would be more democracy in our planet.
Technology challenges a little bit, and then the related policy challenges. So, as people remarked earlier today, we can build AI systems that can do some incredibly complicated things, but we still fall down all the time on the simplest tasks. There are things that a very small child can do that no one has any sort of AI system that can do at all. And I think research on conceptual understanding and reasoning is one of the most important technical areas to pursue, and it's one that people have been working on for a long time, honestly, without a lot of progress. I think specialized hardware to let us run very large models is an important area of technical research and work, and we'll see incredible results from that. I'm super confident. Policy-wise, I think the rate of change is so fast, and the things that are going to be possible are happening so quickly that I worry about the ability of our governance systems to keep up. I think if someone wanted to today, they could put a bunch of drones up in Paris that we're trained to recognize someone's face and fly around the city and find them and do something bad to them. And that's a terrifying thing because I don't have a great technical solution to stop that. I haven't heard one. But things like that are quite scary and quite dangerous with technology that we have today are going to happen at a rate that I don't think our regulatory system, our legal system, is very good at moving quickly. So that's something I worry about. Policy-wise, I think the challenge of how our governance systems move much more quickly in light of how quickly this is going to sort of change the world is really important. And then longer term, how do we build, as these systems become smarter than humans in most ways and eventually always, how do we make sure it's aligned with what humanity wants? How do we make sure that this is about individual empowerment and not, centralization into a single system of desires and ethics?
Thank you so much. What are for you two actually, and maybe Antoine, you can start with that. What are the main barriers that should be removed to have an AI that is adopted at scale, and what should be the role of political leaders so that it benefits to the whole society a bit? Yeah.
Well, I think what is indispensable is that we should have IA which can really be advantageous for the largest number of people, AI which really reaches out for large groups. Based on what I heard this morning, we consider AI to be almost made up of little green creatures coming in from a different dimension or different galaxy. But the point is, we've got to decide what sort of value we want to promote, what sort of society we want, and then build AI algorithms that will allow us to get there, not the other way around. It shouldn't be imposed on us. And I think that's really quite important. This is what we heard earlier on. Values are not necessarily universal. And I think what's very important for all politicians, let's just give you one example, an area which was mentioned this morning, and that is health data. In France, we have which I feel and many other people feel, an excellent health care system. But if you made all the health data available to an outsider, either a Chinese or American operator, what guarantee do you have that in 5 or 10 years' time you have the same healthcare system? There's no guarantee at all. It's not clear at all because people's motivations may not be the same. And this is why I think it's very important that we understand that the digital world that we're building is something that we should define and design. It's not something that should be forced on us or imposed on us. And we've also got to be able to explain to everybody around, average layman, because here we've got a public which has probably done about 20 years of university. But, just the ordinary people in the street, you've got to be able to explain these concepts to them. And they've got to understand that AI is not something that's just going to be forced down their necks. The minister earlier on said that the algorithms decide, and I'm sorry, algorithms do not decide. And sorry to say this to the minister, but I think we've got to create a world where other people decide. Algorithms can make recommendations, but it's very important if an algorithm decides for you, well then you have to make sure that the criteria that are the basis for those decisions are at least designed by us. We talked about machine learning, and machine learning can be very good for optimizing the criteria, but the criteria at the base have to be designed by us. That's the real challenge. And we've got to make sure that AI can be beneficial for the largest number of people, but it's also got to be understood and accepted by the greater group. That, I think, is what we have to work on. France is probably one of the countries where digital learning is still very early, at its early stages. I think we've made a lot of progress, but we've still got to go pretty far. And it's not just to come up with the right sort of experts, but it's also so that we can teach ordinary people about the sort of world in which they're going to be living, because the AI world should be there working for them, not the other way around.
I had one question to you, Antoine. I'm not pointing a contradiction, but maybe between the beginning of your statement, where you said, hey, we should not be the specialist of ethics in Europe and the specialist of business around the right in other countries. Now you're pointing the necessity to kind of control, regulate, and find the right criteria. Not a contradiction, but where do you put the cursor here?
Je pense que la vraie question, c'est...
I think the real question is, where do we put the cursor? We can't regulate everything because we wouldn't really be a democracy if we were doing that, and we wouldn't be generating value or employment. And frequently, startups are made up of people who find a slot bias through which they can actually create a business. But I feel that there are risks that I mentioned. I talked about the healthcare system, which I mentioned earlier on, but you can look at insurance as well. And I think we've got to be very careful. We are living in a world where there is a power game going on. And if you think that France and Europe want to generate value and generate jobs and keep their ethics and their values alive, then you've got to regulate things a little bit. And what is difficult is to put the cursor at the right spot. But if you put it on one extreme or the other, will really be disastrous.
Sam, on both topics actually, how to make AI beneficial for the whole society and where to put the cursor between ethics and business friendly.
When democracy works, at least theoretically, it's sort of what most people want, or at least what they think they want, those are kind of the regulations in the society that we get. Throughout history, when there is decisive economic benefit from a new technology, people want that. And the desire for that tends to be stronger than almost any other force. People want fairness. People want equality for sure. But the history of technology is that when a new technology comes with a decisive economic advantage, where people's lives can be made better for less money, that eventually happens. There is no government that I have ever seen or studied that is able to resist that for a very long period of time. And I think, that's generally good. People's lives have gotten incredibly much better. For all of the problems of capitalism and technology, it has, we have lifted more people out of poverty than I think would have been imaginable a couple of 100 years ago. But I think the world will trend towards whatever produces economic value and makes people's lives better. However, as we've said throughout this, there are major downsides and major things that can go wrong. And I think starting a discussion now that a lot of people participate in early, where we sort of as a world together talk about what this means and how this is going to work, is really important. But I do believe sort of the economic benefit here cannot be stopped.
Very clear.
Oh, and then on the cursor, I agree. I think it would be silly not to think about the economic benefit, but the consequences of this, getting this wrong, are so catastrophic to so many people that I think we have to push against that natural force to only focus on the economic benefit, or we'll get a world that we really don't want.
Antoine, yeah?
Peut-être comme on est entre nous, on peut tout leur avouer.
Well, we're just in a closed club, so perhaps we could say something. We could send around a little notice saying, come on, say what you like because the minister's got stepped out. But yeah, no, let's go on a little bit on those lines. Anyway, so I just like to stress and underline a point that has been raised several times, and I think is really important. We've got 5 minutes. Okay. 5 minutes before a minister steps into the room. Okay. Just one point, which I think has been mentioned many times, and I think it's very important. We were talking about barriers, and I think it's the links between academia and industry. I think we've made quite a lot of progress, but we've got to go further. And I think we've got to work better together. We've got to know each other better. I think the positions that were mentioned by the minister, and I think we can see that there are some examples here that live up to that, that is having a foot in each camp. Well, they're not that common. And I think if we could find people who are either partially working at university or in a public state-owned research lab and also in industry, I think it's a win-win-win situation for everybody. It's good for everybody. And this is something that we've got to try and develop further. I mean, it's not that I'm not sure, but I know that this is much more widespread in the United States and also in Canada. And so I think we should follow that model.
Do you have a point of view on the openness of research on AI? Do you have a point of view on open research on AI and sharing all the research to better publicly control it?
Alors moi, je pense.
Well, I think generally speaking, when we're talking about questions of security, which we talked about earlier on, it's important to have open data.
Tout le monde.
Everybody knows that it's not a guarantee. If I give you a source code, I think quite a few of you can actually check. But if I don't give you the source code, well, you're definitely not going to get there. So I think that large companies such as Facebook, Jan talked about earlier on, have chosen this particular model, shows that there's no opposition between open software, which is capable of doing trade or business. I think business is somewhere else. But I think given our present-day society, there is a model. And there are some cases where you would need international property rights. But I think we've got to use this for the common good. And so we have to have this in open source. I think that's obvious.
Panel, thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you.